Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First, thank you. The support you've shown lately has been incredible. Every comment, theory, and deep dive you've shared keeps these stories alive and pushes them further. Today, we're stepping onto the deck of humanity's so-called last ship, a vessel carrying a mission so desperate that it would erase an entire star system from the map, just to make sure we survived. Let's find out why. Commander Tobias Rourke felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his boots as another transmission burst through the Defiance communication array, the emergency frequency crackling with desperate voices from across human space. Colony 77 Alpha is gone, reported Captain Hayes from the mining station at Kepler 442. They hit us with some kind of molecular disruptor. The entire settlement just dissolved. Buildings, people, everything turned to dust in seconds. The transmission cut to static, leaving Rourke staring at the laser plasma display where red markers indicated 17 human colonies that had simply vanished from the tactical grid in the past 6 hours. Dr. Marcus Thorne burst through the command deck's airlock, his engineering uniform stained with coolant fluid and his hands trembling as he clutched a data tablet. "Commander, I've been monitoring the attack patterns. Whatever weapons they're using operates on quantum-level disruption. The molecular bonds just fail catastrophically. But that's not the worst part." Thorne's voice carried the weight of a man who had spent his career building things, now forced to contemplate their complete annihilation. "The attacks are coordinated across 12 separate star systems simultaneously. This isn't a raiding party or territorial dispute. They're systematically exterminating every human presence they can find." The heads-up display flickered as Lieutenant Kane Brickwell fed new navigation data from his sensor station, his fingers dancing across the control interface with practiced efficiency. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Intelligence Division. It's marked with Alpha Zero clearance." Rourke had never seen an Alpha Zero designation in his 23 years of military service, but the implications sent ice through his veins. Such clearance levels were reserved for species extinction scenarios, the kind of intelligence that could determine whether humanity survived the next decade. When the transmission resolved on the main display, Director Felix Grant's weathered face appeared against the background of Earth's orbital defense platforms, but his expression carried none of the bureaucratic composure Rourke expected from intelligence leadership. "All colonial defense forces, this is Director Grant with Emergency Protocol 777. The attacking force identifies itself as the Cathara Sovereignty. They have declared human expansion a territorial violation, requiring what they term species sterilization. This is not a negotiable conflict. They intend to kill every human being in the galaxy." Grant paused, and Rourke could see the man's jaw working as he forced himself to continue. "However, our deep cover operatives have discovered critical intelligence about their operational structure." The display shifted to show star charts and biological data that made Rourke's tactical mind race with possibilities. The Cathara evolved on volcanic worlds requiring ambient temperatures above 200 degrees Celsius for biological function. Their entire governmental and military command infrastructure operates from a single system designated Nexus Prime, where they maintain their ancestral homeworld through massive geothermal tap stations that prevent planetary cooling. Every major decision, every fleet coordination, every strategic directive originates from Nexus Prime because they cannot establish permanent command structures on normal temperature worlds. Thorne leaned forward, his engineering expertise immediately grasping the implications. "Commander, if their entire species requires artificial heating systems, then they're dependent on technological infrastructure for basic survival. Any disruption to their heating network would be catastrophic." The doctor's hands moved instinctively to his toolkit, the reflexive gesture of a man already calculating how to tear apart what others had built. The intelligence briefing continued with technical specifications that transformed Rourke's understanding of the tactical situation. Nexus Prime maintains surface temperatures through a network of geothermal tap stations that extract thermal energy from the planetary core and distribute it through atmospheric processors. Our analysis indicates that synchronized disruption of multiple tap stations would trigger a planetary cooling cascade, making the world uninhabitable for Cathara biology within days. The network consists of 47 primary installations, but mathematical modeling suggests that destroying just 6 critical nodes would initiate irreversible thermal collapse. Rourke studied the Defiant's technical specifications on his personal display, noting the ship's primary cargo, experimental deep-core mining charges designed for fracturing planetary mantles in large-scale resource extraction operations. Each charge contained plasma fusion warheads specifically engineered to disrupt geological thermal systems, exactly the technology needed to target geothermal infrastructure. Thorne, what would it take to modify our mining charges for precision deployment against those tap stations? The engineering officer's eyes widened as he processed the question's implications. The charges use synchronized detonation patterns to fracture geological structures. If we could calculate the resonance frequencies of their geothermal network, we might be able to trigger cascade failures with remarkable efficiency. But Commander, we're talking about killing an entire planetary population. The thermal collapse would doom every Cathara on Nexus Prime. Another emergency transmission interrupted their discussion as Admiral Corvin from the Third Fleet reported from the Centauri system. All stations, this is Admiral Corvin. We've lost contact with 14 colonial settlements in the past hour. The Cathara are using some kind of quantum disruption technology that bypasses our shields entirely. Conventional weapons have no effect on their vessels. We need new tactical approaches immediately, or humanity faces extinction within weeks. Rourke felt the weight of command settle across his shoulders like a physical burden as he realized the Defiant might represent humanity's only chance for survival. The ship carried the right weapons, commanded by officers with the right expertise, positioned to strike at the enemy's most critical vulnerability. But success would require committing genocide against an entire species, crossing moral boundaries that would transform him from a protector into something far darker. The laser plasma displays around the command deck painted their tactical situation in the stark numerical terms. 47 human colonies destroyed, estimated casualty count exceeding 12 million people. Enemy fleet strength unknown but sufficient to operate across multiple star systems simultaneously. Against this overwhelming force, humanity possessed one experimental mining vessel, 18 deep-core charges, and intelligence about a target 4 months' travel through hostile space. Lieutenant Brickwell's sensor analysis provided the final piece of tactical information that would determine their course of action. Commander, I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout this region. Our enhanced navigation sensors can plot safe jump routes through unstable space that enemy vessels might not be able to traverse. If we can reach Nexus Prime before they realize our destination, we might achieve tactical surprise. The young officer's voice carried both hope and horror as he understood the mission's implications. Rourke looked around his command deck at the faces of men who had signed up to protect human expansion, now forced to contemplate planetary genocide as their species' only hope for survival. The decision would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. But the mathematics were brutally simple. Either the Cathara died, or humanity faced extinction. Set course for Nexus Prime, and may God forgive us for what we're about to do. Dr. Marcus Thorne's workshop had become a laboratory for transforming tools of creation into instruments of planetary death. The deep-core mining charges lay disassembled across his engineering tables, their plasma fusion cores exposed like mechanical hearts waiting for surgical modification. Each charge had been designed to fracture geological structures through controlled thermal disruption, but Thorne's calculations showed that synchronized detonation patterns could trigger catastrophic failures in any geothermal network. His hands moved with surgical certainty as he recalibrated the fusion triggers, adjusting detonation frequencies to match the resonance patterns of Cathara thermal infrastructure. Commander Rourke studied the tactical displays showing their 4-month journey through increasingly hostile space, where Cathara pursuit fleets had established patrol patterns designed to intercept any human vessel attempting deep space operations. The Defiant's enhanced gravitational sensors represented humanity's single technological advantage, allowing navigation through spatial anomalies that enemy ships avoided due to their different sensor technologies. Lieutenant Brickwell had identified 17 gravitational corridors that could provide concealment during their approach to Nexus Prime, but each passage required precise timing and perfect navigation to avoid catastrophic tidal forces. The modifications are more complex than I initially calculated, Thorne reported during their daily engineering briefing, his voice carrying the strain of working 18-hour shifts for the past 3 weeks. The Kythera geothermal network operates on thermal resonance principles I've never encountered. Their tap stations don't just extract heat from the planetary core, they actually synchronize with geological thermal currents to amplify energy output. Disrupting this synchronization requires extremely specific detonation sequences. The doctor's explanations carried technical complexity that made Rourke grateful for his engineering background, though the moral weight of their mission cast shadows over every calculation. The crew's psychological preparation had become as critical as their technical modifications, since every man aboard the Defiant understood they were embarking on a mission that would either save humanity or transform them into perpetrators of genocide on an unprecedented scale. Rourke had instituted daily briefings where officers could voice their concerns about the mission's ethical implications, but these discussions only reinforced the terrible mathematics of their situation. Either they succeeded in killing billions of Kythera, or humanity faced complete extinction within months. 3 weeks into their journey, Kane Brickwell detected the first Kythera pursuit elements, attempting to track their route through gravitational anomalies, forcing immediate tactical adjustments to their navigation plan. "Sir, I'm reading quantum disruption signatures along our previous trajectory. They're learning to follow our sensor emissions through the gravitational corridors. We need to modify our approach pattern, or they'll intercept us before we reach Nexus Prime." The young officer's analysis prompted a complete revision of their routing plan, adding 6 additional weeks to their journey while ensuring they maintained tactical surprise. Thorne's weapon modifications had progressed beyond simple charge recalibration to complete reconstruction of the plasma fusion cores, transforming mining equipment into precision instruments of geological warfare. Each modified charge now carries 3 separate detonation triggers, he explained during a technical briefing that felt more like planning a war crime than discussing mining operations. Primary detonation creates thermal disruption in the target structure. Secondary detonation amplifies geological instability through resonance cascade. Tertiary detonation ensures irreversible thermal collapse by fracturing deep core thermal channels. The clinical precision of his explanations could not mask the horrific implications of weapons designed to kill entire planets. The Defiance crew had developed tactical procedures for deploying mining charges against defensive installations, treating geothermal tap stations like fortified military targets rather than civilian infrastructure essential for species survival. Weapons officer Dex Corvin had calculated deployment sequences that would maximize tactical effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy counterfire. But every tactical advantage came at the cost of increasing the civilian death toll. The charges would need to be delivered with mathematical precision to achieve the synchronized detonation patterns required for planetary thermal collapse. Their navigation through hostile space had become a deadly game of timing and concealment, where minutes of exposure could bring Kythera interception fleets down upon them with overwhelming firepower. Rourke had developed tactical protocols that used gravitational anomalies as both concealment and weapons, positioning the Defiant within tidal force fields that would tear apart pursuing vessels while providing cover for their continued advance toward Nexus Prime. Each successful passage through Kythera patrol zones brought them closer to their target while increasing the psychological pressure on his crew. During the 8th week of their journey, intercepted Kythera communications provided intelligence about their target system that transformed the mission's moral complexity. The broadcasts described massive evacuation preparations throughout their colonial territories, with entire populations being transported to Nexus Prime for protection against human counterattacks. Rather than finding a military target, they would encounter a refugee center containing the majority of Kythera civilian population, concentrated in thermal habitats that could not be evacuated quickly enough to prevent catastrophic casualties. Thorne's final weapon modifications incorporated targeting algorithms that would ensure maximum tactical effectiveness against geothermal infrastructure while providing some possibility for civilian evacuation, though the biological constraints of Kythera physiology made rapid population movement impossible. "I've programmed the charges for sequential rather than simultaneous detonation," he reported with obvious reluctance. This will create a thermal collapse timeline measured in days rather than hours, potentially allowing some evacuation of non-essential population. But Commander, we're still talking about genocidal casualty numbers, regardless of timing modifications. The crew's final psychological preparation sessions had evolved into something resembling group therapy, where officers struggled to reconcile their duty to protect humanity with the moral implications of planetary genocide. Rourke found himself serving as both military commander and counselor, helping his men process the ethical weight of their mission while maintaining the tactical focus necessary for success. These discussions had no easy answers, only the brutal mathematics of species survival that left no room for moral comfort. As they approached the final month of their journey toward Nexus Prime, Rourke reviewed their tactical situation with the grim satisfaction of a commander who had successfully navigated impossible odds while fully understanding the moral cost of victory. They had evaded Cathara pursuit fleets, modified mining equipment into planetary weapons, and maintained crew cohesion despite the psychological pressure of their mission. But success would require crossing boundaries that would forever change not just the tactical balance between species, but the moral character of everyone involved in humanity's survival. Jesus Christ, Lieutenant Kane Brickwell whispered as his sensors resolved the first detailed images of Nexus Prime, his hands frozen over the navigation controls while the tactical display painted a picture that defied every assumption about alien civilization. Commander Rourke felt his throat constrict as he stared at what could only be described as a planetary-scale furnace, where the Cathara homeworld glowed like a coal in the darkness of space, its surface temperature readings indicating thermal levels that would vaporize human tissue in seconds. The planet's atmosphere shimmered with heat distortion, visible even from their position at the system's edge, while massive industrial structures stretched across continents like mechanical veins, feeding thermal energy to billions of inhabitants. Dr. Marcus Thorne's voice carried a mixture of professional admiration and growing horror as he analyzed the engineering specifications streaming across his displays. Commander, I'm reading thermal output levels that suggest they've turned their entire planet into a controlled fusion reactor. Those aren't just geothermal tap stations. They're massive thermal amplification networks that extract energy from the planetary core and distribute it through atmospheric processing systems covering every inhabited surface. The engineering data revealed construction projects spanning millennia, where the Cathara had essentially rebuilt their world's entire thermal infrastructure to maintain the extreme temperatures their biology required. The orbital, here you are, infrastructure surrounding Nexus Prime stretched beyond anything human engineering had attempted, with thermal habitats extending outward from the planet in concentric rings that housed what appeared to be the majority of Kithra civilization. Rourke counted hundreds of massive stations, each one glowing with internal heat sources and connected to the planetary surface through thermal conduits that pulsed with energy transfers. The sight triggered an emotional response he struggled to process, combining awe at the scope of their achievement with the crushing realization that he was contemplating the destruction of perhaps the greatest engineering accomplishment in galactic history. Lieutenant Brickwell's tactical analysis revealed the true scope of the challenge facing their mission as his sensors penetrated deeper into the system's defensive arrangements. Sir, I'm detecting population concentrations that suggest between 8 and 12 billion Cathara inhabiting this system. The thermal habitats aren't just military installations. They're essentially floating cities designed to house their entire breeding population in controlled temperature environments. And the defensive fleet positions indicate they've been expecting our arrival. The young officer's voice carried the weight of understanding that their mission had evolved from a military strike to something approaching species genocide. Thorne's detailed scan of the geothermal network provided the tactical intelligence that would determine whether their mission remained feasible or had become impossible. The TAP stations are more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested. Each installation connects to deep core thermal channels that extend thousands of kilometers into the planetary mantle. They've essentially turned their world into a massive thermal engine, but the engineering complexity means that disrupting the wrong installations could trigger geological instability affecting the entire planet. His analysis revealed 6 critical nexus points where thermal conduits converged, creating vulnerabilities that could cascade through the entire network if properly exploited. The moral weight of their discovery settled over the command deck like a physical presence, as Rourke processed intelligence that transformed their tactical situation from a military strike to a decision about whether to commit the largest act of genocide in recorded galactic history. The Cathara had concentrated their entire civilization within Nexus Prime not as a military strategy, but because their biology made survival impossible anywhere else. Destroying the thermal infrastructure would doom every man, woman, and child of their species, including billions of civilians who had played no role in the decision to exterminate humanity. Kane Brickwell's continued sensor sweeps revealed defensive preparations that indicated the Cathara command structure understood exactly what humanity intended to accomplish with their arrival at Nexus Prime. Commander, their fleet positions suggest they know about our mining charges and their potential effectiveness against thermal infrastructure. They've deployed defensive formations around each critical tap station, but the positioning indicates they're trying to protect civilian evacuation routes rather than simply defending military targets. The tactical display showed Kithra vessels arranged in patterns that prioritize covering evacuation corridors over optimal defensive geometry. Thorne's weapon analysis provided the final technical specifications needed to execute their mission, though his voice carried obvious reluctance as he delivered information that would enable planetary destruction. The modified charges can achieve the synchronized detonation patterns necessary to disrupt their thermal network, but success requires precise deployment against those 6 critical nexus points. Each target sits at the center of massive civilian population concentrations. We cannot destroy the thermal infrastructure without killing billions of non-combatants in the process. His engineering expertise had created weapons capable of accomplishing their mission, but the human cost would be beyond calculation. The command deck fell silent as every officer processed the implications of intelligence that revealed the true scope of what their mission would accomplish. They had come to Nexus Prime expecting to find a military target, but instead discovered a civilization that had transformed an entire star system into a refuge for their species. The thermal habitats contained families, children, elderly population, artists, scientists, and countless civilians whose only crime was belonging to a species whose government had declared war on humanity. Rourke studied the tactical displays showing Cathara evacuation efforts already underway, with massive transport vessels beginning the impossible task of relocating billions of inhabitants to distant colonies that lacked the thermal infrastructure necessary to sustain large populations. The evacuation timelines stretched across months or years, making rapid population movement impossible due to biological constraints that required gradual temperature adjustment. Even if the Cathara possessed unlimited transport capacity, their biology made emergency evacuation a death sentence for most of their population. The emotional impact of their discovery forced Rourke to confront the reality that success would transform him from a military commander defending his species into something far darker. The mathematics remained brutally simple. Either he ordered the destruction of Nexus Prime and saved humanity through genocide, or he abandoned the mission and allowed his own species to face extinction. But the intelligence gathered during their reconnaissance had revealed that the Cathara were not monsters, simply a different form of life struggling to survive in a hostile galaxy, much like humanity itself. General Vex Morath of the Cathara Defense Command. This is Commander Tobias Rourke of the United Earthship Defiant. Rourke spoke into the communication array, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands as he initiated contact with the enemy commander, who would determine whether genocide could be avoided. The response came within minutes, transmitted on the standard diplomatic frequencies that suggested the Cathara had been monitoring human communications and understood the protocols for military discourse between species. When Morath's image appeared on the main display, Rourke found himself looking at a being whose alien features could not disguise the intelligence and dignity of a professional military officer facing an impossible tactical situation. Morath's response carried the formal courtesy expected between military commanders, though his words carried the weight of a man defending his entire species from extinction. Commander Rourke, your reputation precedes you through our intelligence networks. We understand that you carry weapons capable of disrupting our thermal infrastructure, and we acknowledge that such disruption would result in planetary cooling beyond our biological tolerance. I propose we discuss terms that might avoid the necessity of total warfare. The Kithara general's voice carried no hostility, only the pragmatic assessment of a commander seeking tactical solutions to strategic impossibilities. The exchange that followed revealed the depth of intelligence both sides possessed about each other's capabilities and constraints. As Rourke outlined humanity's tactical position, while Marath explained the biological realities that made Cathar evacuation essentially impossible within any reasonable timeline. General, our analysis indicates that your species requires months of gradual temperature adjustment to survive relocation to normal temperature environments. My government's directive requires immediate cessation of attacks against human colonies, but your evacuation timeline extends beyond our tactical window for negotiation. Rourke's words carried the clinical precision of military planning while acknowledging the humanitarian disaster their mission would create. Morath's response demonstrated the strategic thinking that had made him commander of Nexus Prime's defenses, as he outlined evacuation procedures already underway, while acknowledging their fundamental inadequacy for protecting the majority of his population. Commander, we began emergency evacuation protocols upon detecting your approach, but our transport capacity can relocate perhaps 10% of our population before thermal collapse becomes irreversible. We are asking you to balance the survival of your species against the lives of 8 billion civilians who played no role in our government's decision to declare war against humanity. The general's words carried the weight of a military professional forced to negotiate from a position of absolute weakness. The tactical discussion evolved into something resembling a professional consultation between engineers, as both commanders analyzed the technical specifications of thermal collapse and evacuation logistics, seeking solutions that might minimize civilian casualties while addressing humanity's strategic requirements. Rourke found himself developing grudging respect for Morath's competence as the alien commander demonstrated detailed understanding of the mining charge's capabilities and their potential effectiveness against Kithara thermal infrastructure. The conversation carried the surreal quality of two military professionals collaborating on genocide prevention while planning for its potential necessity. Thorne's technical input provided crucial information about detonation timing that created possibilities for expanded evacuation windows, though the fundamental mathematics remained brutally unforgiving. General Morath, our weapons can be programmed for sequential rather than simultaneous detonation, creating a thermal collapse timeline extending across 72 hours rather than immediate planetary cooling. This modification would provide additional time for evacuation procedures, though biological constraints suggest limited improvement in survival percentages. The engineering discussion carried clinical precision while addressing humanitarian concerns that neither commander could ignore. Morath's counterproposal revealed the strategic intelligence that had made him an effective military leader, as he offered tactical concessions designed to address humanity's security requirements while maximizing civilian survival possibilities. Commander, I propose immediate cessation of all military operations against human targets and withdrawal of Kithara fleets from human space in exchange for maximum feasible evacuation time before thermal infrastructure destruction. Our government will formally acknowledge human territorial claims and establish permanent non-aggression protocols. The offer represented complete capitulation on strategic objectives while seeking minimal concessions for civilian protection. The negotiation reached its critical decision point when Rourke realized that accepting Morath's terms would require him to trust the word of an enemy commander while gambling with humanity's survival, but rejecting them would require ordering genocide against billions of civilians. The mathematics of species survival provided no guidance for moral decisions of such magnitude, leaving Rourke to choose between potential salvation through negotiation and certain protection through extermination. The weight of command had never felt heavier as he contemplated choices that would define both species' futures. Lieutenant Brickwell's tactical analysis provided real-time intelligence about Cathar evacuation progress that would determine the feasibility of Morath's proposals, as his sensors tracked massive transport movements throughout the Nexus Prime system. Sir, I'm detecting acceleration in their evacuation procedures. Transport vessels are departing at maximum capacity, but current evacuation rates suggest they might relocate 20% of their population within 72 hours if thermal collapse timeline extends as Dr. Thorne calculated. The young officer's report provided concrete data for evaluating whether negotiated solutions remain viable. Rourke's final decision required balancing military necessity against humanitarian concerns while accepting personal responsibility for consequences that would affect billions of lives across multiple species. The conversation with Morath had revealed the Cathara as fellow military professionals facing impossible choices rather than monsters deserving extermination. But humanity's survival requirements remained unchanged, regardless of enemy humanity. The choice would define not only the tactical outcome of their mission, but the moral character of the man making decisions that would echo through galactic history. All stations, weapons free, Rourke commanded as the Defiant accelerated toward the first geothermal nexus point, where Cathara defensive formations had concentrated their most powerful vessels in desperate attempts to protect the thermal infrastructure essential for their species' survival. The space around Nexus Prime erupted into chaos as quantum disruption beams lanced through the darkness, their molecular dissolving energy creating brief flares of destroyed matter where they intercepted human weapons fire. Lieutenant Brickwell's tactical display tracked 17 Cathra interceptors moving to block their approach vector, while evacuation transports continued their frantic exodus from the doomed planet below. Dr. Thorne's voice crackled through the communication system as he prepared the first mining charge for deployment, his hands steady despite the moral weight of weapons designed to kill entire civilizations. Charge 1 armed and ready for deployment against Thermal Nexus Alpha 7. Detonation sequence programmed for maximum geological disruption with 72-hour cascade timeline. The clinical precision of his report could not mask the fact that they were preparing to murder billions of civilians whose only crime was requiring artificial heating systems for biological survival. The Defiant shuddered under enemy fire as Cathara defensive formations concentrated their quantum disruption weapons against the human vessel's approach, but Rourke's superior navigation through gravitational anomalies allowed tactical positioning that enemy commanders could not anticipate or counter effectively. Brickwell, execute evasion pattern Delta 7 and bring us within deployment range of the primary thermal nexus. Thorne, prepare for emergency charge deployment if they breach our defensive screen. The space battle had become a deadly race between Cathara attempts to destroy the human vessel and Rourke's efforts to deliver enough mining charges to trigger irreversible planetary cooling. The first mining charge detonated against the thermal infrastructure with devastating effectiveness, sending massive shock waves through the geological systems that maintain Nexus Prime's surface temperature. Thorne's sensors registered immediate thermal disruption across an entire continental region as geothermal conduits collapsed and atmospheric processors failed in cascading sequence. Commander, Charge 1 has achieved primary objectives. Thermal output in Sector 7 declining by 30% and continuing to drop. Planetary cooling has begun, but we need to hit at least 4 more nexus points to ensure irreversible cascade failure. General Morath's defensive fleet repositioned with tactical excellence that earned Rourke's professional admiration, even as they sought to destroy his ship and prevent humanity's survival. The Cathara commander had deployed his vessels in overlapping defensive formations that protected evacuation corridors while maintaining concentrated firepower against the Defiant's attack vectors. Sir, enemy tactical positioning suggests they're prioritizing civilian evacuation over defensive effectiveness. They could achieve better tactical geometry if they abandoned evacuation coverage. Brickwell reported with obvious respect for their opponent's moral priorities. The second and third mining charges found their targets despite increasingly desperate Cathara defensive efforts, as Thorne's technical expertise allowed precise deployment against thermal infrastructure that had never been designed to withstand synchronized geological warfare. Each successful detonation sent visible shock waves across the planet's surface, where thermal storms began forming as atmospheric heating systems failed and surface temperatures started their inexorable decline toward levels that would kill every living thing on Nexus Prime within days. Rourke felt the moral weight of each successful charge deployment as tactical displays showed evacuation transports fleeing the dying planet in desperate streams, their thermal cargo bays packed with refugees facing an uncertain future on distant colonies that lacked adequate heating infrastructure. Thorne, status report on planetary thermal decline. How long before surface temperatures drop below Cathara biological tolerance? The question carried the weight of 8 billion lives hanging in the balance between military necessity and humanitarian disaster. The engineering analysis revealed the terrible efficiency of their weapons as Thorne tracked thermal collapse across multiple continental regions, where geothermal networks were failing in precisely the cascading sequence his calculations had predicted. Commander, surface temperatures dropping at approximately 15 degrees per hour. At current rate of decline, Nexus Prime will become uninhabitable for Cathara biology within 60 hours. The thermal cascade is now irreversible regardless of any emergency heating measures they might attempt. His report carried the clinical precision of engineering analysis while documenting the death of an entire world. The fourth mining charge met concentrated enemy resistance as Morath's remaining forces threw everything into preventing further thermal infrastructure destruction. But Cathara weapons proved inadequate against human gravitational navigation advantages that allowed attack vectors their technology could not anticipate. Rourke watched enemy vessels sacrifice themselves in suicidal ramming attacks designed to protect civilian evacuation routes rather than achieve tactical victory, demonstrating moral priorities that made their destruction feel like murdering fellow soldiers rather than defeating enemies. Lieutenant Brickwell's damage assessment revealed critical systems failures throughout the Defiant, as Cathara defensive fire took its toll on their vessel's structural integrity, but the mission parameters remained achievable if they could survive long enough to deliver the remaining charges. Sir, we've lost primary engines and weapon systems are operating at 60% efficiency, but sensor analysis indicates we've achieved sufficient thermal disruption to guarantee planetary cooling beyond Cathara survival thresholds. The young officer's report carried both tactical satisfaction and emotional exhaustion from participating in genocide. The final phase of their attack brought them into range of Nexus Prime's primary command installation, where General Morath had positioned his flagship to coordinate both defensive operations and evacuation management, while maintaining tactical command over forces trying to save their civilization. Rourke realized that destroying the command structure would eliminate Cathara's ability to coordinate emergency heating measures or organize effective evacuation procedures, ensuring that planetary cooling would proceed without interference. The tactical logic was flawless, but the moral implications transformed him from a military commander into something far darker. The Defiant's final charge detonated against Nexus Prime's primary command installation with devastating precision, sending General Morath's flagship tumbling through space as its structural integrity failed under the mining charge's geological disruption effects. Commander Rourke watched the alien vessel break apart through his tactical display, knowing that he had just eliminated the leadership necessary for coordinating either evacuation procedures or emergency thermal restoration efforts. The explosion marked not just the destruction of enemy command structure, but the beginning of humanity's transformation from victim species to galactic force too dangerous to provoke through conventional warfare. Dr. Thorne's final engineering report documented the irreversible thermal collapse that would kill Nexus Prime within 48 hours as surface temperatures continued their steady decline toward levels that would freeze Cathara biology into extinction. Commander, planetary thermal output has declined below critical thresholds across all inhabited regions. Even if they possessed emergency heating technology, the geological damage to deep core thermal channels makes temperature restoration impossible. We have successfully destroyed their homeworld and eliminated their species' primary population center. His words carried the clinical precision of technical analysis while acknowledging their participation in the largest act of genocide in recorded galactic history. The evacuation efforts continued throughout Nexus Prime's death spiral as surviving Cathara commanders attempted to coordinate refugee movements without central leadership. Their transport vessels, carrying whatever fraction of their population, could be relocated to distant colonies before planetary cooling reached lethal levels. Lieutenant Brickwell tracked the exodus through his sensors, counting millions of evacuees aboard vessels, fleeing to heating stations that lacked infrastructure to support large populations. The tactical displays painted a picture of species-scale diaspora as Cathara civilization, scattered across multiple star systems, in desperate search of thermal environments that could sustain their biology. 3 months after Nexus Prime's thermal collapse, intercepted communications revealed the diplomatic revolution that Rourke's mission had triggered throughout the galactic community, where multiple species were reassessing their strategic policies toward humanity based on demonstrated willingness to commit planetary genocide when facing extinction. The Altarian Trade Federation formally established diplomatic protocols for approaching human territory through intermediary species rather than direct contact, while the Zelani Collective implemented buffer zones designed to prevent accidental territorial conflicts that might trigger similar responses from Earth's colonial expansion. General Morath, commanding evacuation fleets rather than military operations from his new headquarters on a distant heating station, broadcast the formal ceasefire that transformed the strategic balance between humanity and surviving Cathara forces. All Cathara military units, this is General Morath with Emergency Protocol 777. Effective immediately, all hostile operations against human targets will cease permanently. Human territorial claims throughout contested regions are formally acknowledged, and non-aggression treaties will be established through neutral intermediaries. The transmission carried the weight of a commander whose species had learned that some enemies were too dangerous to fight regardless of tactical advantages. The galactic intelligence networks that had monitored the Nexus Prime incident began documenting humanity's new strategic reputation as a species capable of stellar-scale warfare when facing existential threats, transforming Earth from a target for conquest into a civilization that other species approach through diplomatic channels rather than military pressure. Trade agreements replaced territorial disputes as alien governments recognized that humanity's industrial technology could be weaponized in ways that threatened entire star systems. The tactical precedent established at Nexus Prime created deterrent effects that protected human expansion across multiple fronts simultaneously. Rourke's sacrifice aboard the Defiant became legendary within both human and alien military circles as an example of strategic thinking that achieved victory through reputation rather than tactical dominance, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest military success comes from establishing consequences too terrible for enemies to risk provoking. The mining charges that destroyed Nexus Prime were studied by military academies throughout the galaxy as examples of industrial technology adapted for strategic warfare, while Rourke's tactical decision-making became required curriculum for officers facing impossible choices between species survival and moral principles. The long-term consequences of humanity's demonstrated willingness to commit genocide created a new category of galactic diplomacy where Earth's territorial expansion proceeded through negotiated agreements rather than military conquest, as alien civilizations recognized that conventional warfare against humans carried risks extending beyond simple tactical defeat. The Nexus Prime precedent established strategic doctrine that protected human colonies throughout contested regions, since potential aggressors understood that attacking humanity might result in their own planetary infrastructure being targeted for systematic destruction. 5 years after Nexus Prime's destruction, the scattered Cathara refugee communities had established new settlements on thermal worlds throughout the galaxy, their diaspora creating diplomatic networks that carried warnings about humanity's military capabilities to every major civilization. These refugee testimonies served as living documentation of what happened when species underestimated human willingness to cross moral boundaries that other civilizations considered unthinkable. The survivors became inadvertent ambassadors for peaceful coexistence, spreading tactical lessons about the costs of provoking Earth's defensive responses. The memorial established at Nexus Prime's coordinates honored both the Kythera civilians who died during planetary cooling and the human crew who sacrificed themselves to establish deterrent effects protecting their species from future extinction attempts. The monument served as a reminder that survival sometimes requires choices that transform protectors into something darker, but that such transformations may be necessary when species face elimination. General Morath, now elder statesman among Cathara refugee communities, regularly visited the memorial to reflect on tactical decisions that could have prevented the catastrophe if made earlier in the conflict. Commander Rourke's final transmission, broadcast as the Defiant disintegrated around him, became the defining statement of humanity's new strategic position within galactic politics. This is Commander Tobias Rourke to all civilizations monitoring this frequency. Today, humanity demonstrated that we will destroy entire star systems rather than accept extinction. Let this serve as both warning and invitation. Approach us as equals seeking mutual prosperity or face consequences that extend beyond anything conventional warfare can achieve. The choice, as always, belongs to you. The message established diplomatic frameworks that govern interspecies relations for generations, transforming humanity from victims into arbiters of galactic peace through demonstrated capacity for total war. If this story sent chills through you, hit that subscribe button. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Commander Rourke's place, knowing the cost, would you pull the trigger to save humanity? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY. See you in the next story.